The waiter at Romano's had that practiced smile waiter's perfect after dealing with awkward couples for years. I should have recognized the warning signs right then, the way he hesitated before approaching our table, like he could sense the tension radiating from my wife Isabelle even from across the restaurant. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," I said, raising my wine glass toward her. She barely looked up from her phone, fingers dancing across the screen with the kind of urgency usually reserved for emergencies or secret conversations. "Mm-hmm," she murmured, not bothering to lift her own glass. 15 years of marriage, and this is what we'd become. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers tap against her phone case, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past few months. Her auburn hair caught the candlelight, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen for her back when we were both young and stupid, and thought love conquered everything. "Isabelle." My voice carried just enough edge to make her look up. "Put the phone away." She glanced at me with those green eyes that used to make my heart skip. Now they just looked annoyed. "It's work, Warren. You know how important this Peterson account is?" "Right. The Peterson account? The one that required so many late nights at the office, so many weekend meetings, so many mysterious phone calls that ended the moment I walked into a room? I'd been restoring classic cars for 23 years, running my own shop for the last 8, and I'd learned to read people the same way I read engines. When something's not running right, you can always hear it in the rhythm." "Of course it is." I took a long sip of wine, letting the silence stretch between us. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation from other tables, other couples who might actually be celebrating something worth celebrating. That's when I saw him walking toward our table. Faulkner Hayes, 6'2", silver at the temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Isabelle's college boyfriend, the one who dumped her senior year to marry some senator's daughter. The same Faulkner who'd been divorced for exactly 8 months. Not that I was keeping track or anything. "Warren! Isabelle! What a coincidence!" Isabelle's phone clattered against her wine glass. Her face flushed that particular shade of pink that used to appear when I surprised her with flowers, back when surprises between us were still pleasant. "Faulkner?" she breathed, and I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard in months. Joy. Genuine, unguarded joy. "What brings you to Romano's?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Coincidences like this don't happen in real life. They happen in badly written scripts and elaborate lies. "Business dinner ran late," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the bar area. "Saw you two and couldn't resist saying hello. Mind if I join you for a minute? I'd love to catch up." The smart play would have been to say yes, we minded. The smart play would have been to politely send him on his way and try to salvage what was left of our anniversary dinner. But I'd stopped making smart plays about 3 months ago, right around the time Isabelle started working late every Tuesday and Thursday, right around the time she bought new lingerie she never wore at home. "Please," Isabelle said before I could respond. "Sit down. We were just talking about work." Faulkner slid into the booth next to Isabelle, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that I could see her pupils dilate slightly when he smiled at her. "So, Warren, how's the car business?" Faulkner asked, but his eyes never left Isabelle's face. "Still getting your hands dirty with those old muscle cars?" "Someone has to keep the classics running," I said. "Not everyone can afford to replace things the moment they get a little worn out." Isabelle shot me a warning look, but I was past caring about warning looks. "That's admirable," Faulkner said. "I've always respected people who work with their hands. Very authentic." The way he said authentic made it sound like a polite word for something much less flattering. I'd heard that tone before, usually from people who thought blue-collar work was quaint, like a hobby rich people picked up on weekends. My phone buzzed. Text from my sister Ava. "Saw Izzy with some silver-haired guy at the Galleria last month. You didn't mention you have an open marriage." I set the phone face down on the table and smiled at our unexpected guest. "Faulkner, wasn't it you who used to say that getting your hands dirty was for people who couldn't afford to pay others to do it for them?" His smile flickered. "Did I say that? College years are such a blur." "Some things stick with you," I said. "Like the time you told Isabelle she'd never amount to anything more than a small-town housewife." Isabelle's face went pale. "Warren, that was a long time ago." "Was it?" I looked between them, noting how they both seemed to have forgotten I was sitting there. Funny how people change. Or don't. The waiter appeared at our table like a guardian angel. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" "Actually," I said, reaching for my wallet, "I think we're finished here." I pulled out my credit card and handed it to the waiter without looking at the bill. 15 years of anniversary dinners, and this would be the last one. The math was simple, even if the emotions weren't. "Warren, What are you doing?" Isabelle's voice carried a note of panic I hadn't heard since the early days of our marriage, when we were still poor enough that every unexpected expense felt like a crisis. "Paying the bill." I signed the receipt with a flourish, adding a generous tip because the waiter had done nothing wrong except serve drinks to a table full of lies. "You two should stay, catch up properly, talk about old times." I stood up, straightening my jacket. The good one Isabelle had bought me last Christmas, back when she still cared about how I looked in public. "I'll send the divorce papers to Faulkner's address," I said, looking directly at my wife, "since you'll probably be living there soon anyway." Isabelle laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Warren, don't be ridiculous. Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." But I was already walking away, and her laughter died somewhere between the dining room and the front door. The night air hit my face like a slap, cold and clean after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, letting my lungs remember how to process oxygen that wasn't thick with lies and expensive cologne. My truck sat in the parking lot like an old friend, reliable and unpretentious. I'd restored her myself, a 1987 Chevy Silverado that ran like a dream, and asked for nothing but regular maintenance and honest work. I was fishing for my keys when I heard footsteps behind me. "Warren." I turned to find Ava walking toward me, her red hair catching the light from the restaurant's neon sign. She was carrying a manila envelope, and her expression was grim. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. "Long enough." She handed me the envelope. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to give you this." Inside were photographs. Isabelle and Faulkner at the Galleria. Isabelle and Faulkner at a coffee shop downtown. Isabelle and Faulkner walking into the Marriott on 5th Street, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing like they shared the world's best secret. "How long?" I asked. "March, as far as I can tell. Maybe longer." March. 3 months of Tuesday and Thursday late nights. 3 months of mysterious phone calls and new lingerie and sudden interest in working out. 3 months of me lying awake at night, wondering if I was losing my mind or just my wife. "The lawyer's office opens at 8, Ava said quietly. "I already called ahead. They're expecting you." I looked back at the restaurant. Through the window, I could see our table. Isabelle was leaning toward Faulkner, animated in a way I hadn't seen her in months. He was nodding, smiling, playing the part of the concerned old friend. "She doesn't know you know," Ava said. "She will soon enough." I climbed into my truck and started the engine. It rumbled to life with the deep, satisfied growl of a machine that had been built to last. In my rearview mirror, I could see Ava getting into her own car, the envelope of evidence still clutched in her hand. 15 years of marriage, and it was ending in a restaurant parking lot with photographic proof of what I'd already known in my gut for months. But as I pulled out onto the street, heading home to an empty house and a bed that would feel different now that I knew the truth, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry. I was planning. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Maybe it was knowing that Isabelle was still at Romano's, probably holding hands with Faulkner over the dessert menu. Maybe it was the way the silence seemed to echo differently when you knew it wasn't temporary. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff Isabelle had bought for my birthday, and spread Ava's photographs across the kitchen table. The evidence was damning and thorough. My sister had always been good at details, a trait that had served her well in her job as a private investigator and apparently in documenting my wife's affair. The front door opened at 11:47 p.m. I knew because I was watching the clock, timing how long it took her to come home after I'd left her with her lover. 2 hours and 33 minutes. Long enough for dinner, drinks, and probably a detailed discussion about what to do next. "Warren?" Her voice carried that careful tone people use when they are not sure what kind of mood they're walking into. "Are you still awake?" "Kitchen," I called back. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing the black dress she'd chosen for our anniversary dinner. Her lipstick was gone, and her hair was slightly mussed, like she'd been running her fingers through it, or like someone else had. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Sit down." She remained standing, arms crossed, defensive posture locked in place. "What you did tonight was humiliating." "For who?" "For me, for Faulkner, for everyone in that restaurant who had to witness your little scene." I took a sip of bourbon, letting it burn away the taste of disappointment. "Tell me about March." Her face went blank. "What about March?" "March 15th specifically, Tuesday, you said you were working late on the Peterson account." "I was working late." "At the Marriott." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Isabelle had always been good at thinking on her feet. one of the qualities that had made her successful in corporate sales. I don't know what you're talking about. I picked up one of the photographs and slid it across the table. Isabelle and Faulkner walking through the Marriott lobby, her hand on his arm, both of them looking like they owned the world. She stared at the photo for a long moment, and I watched her calculate her options. Deny everything and hope I didn't have more evidence. Confess and try to control the narrative, or attack and hope to put me on the defensive. She chose option 3. You had me followed? Her voice rose to that pitch that meant she was shifting into righteous indignation mode. What kind of person does that? The kind who notices when his wife starts lying about where she spends her evenings. I wasn't lying, I was working. With Faulkner. He's a client now. The Peterson account is his account. I had to admire her commitment to the story, even when it was falling apart in real time. Since when? Since March. Convenient timing. She sat down finally, leaning forward with her hands clasped on the table. This was her negotiation posture, the one she used when she was trying to close a difficult sale. Warren, I know how this looks, but you're imagining things that aren't there. Faulkner and I are working together, that's all. Is that what you call it? That's what it is. Her voice was steady now, confident. You're letting your insecurity turn normal business meetings into some kind of conspiracy. Gaslighting 101. Make the victim question their own perceptions. Make them feel crazy for noticing obvious patterns. Make them apologize for having eyes and a functioning brain. Show me the contract, I said. What? The Peterson account. Show me the paperwork. If Faulkner's your client, there should be contracts, correspondence, billing records. She blinked twice, fast. It's confidential. Not from your husband? Warren, you're being paranoid. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, where she always left her work bag. Mind if I take a look? Don't touch that. The sharpness in her voice told me everything I needed to know. Why not? If it's just business? Because it's private. Because you're acting crazy. Because I don't have to prove anything to you. I opened the bag anyway. Inside were the usual items, laptop, phone charger, breath mints, business cards, and underneath it all, a hotel key card from the Marriott. I held it up. Business expense? Isabelle's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. Fine. Yes, we've been seeing each other, but it's not what you think. What do I think? That we're having an affair. Aren't you? We're reconnecting, talking about old times, figuring out what we mean to each other. I almost laughed. While you're married to me. While I'm married to someone who doesn't understand me anymore. There it was. The real truth, finally surfacing after months of lies and misdirection. Not that she was cheating, I'd already known that, but that she blamed me for it. When did I stop understanding you? I asked. When you stopped trying. When you started taking me for granted. When you decided that working on cars was more important than working on us. I work on cars to pay for the house you live in, and the car you drive, and the anniversary dinners you use to meet your lover. He's not my lover. I held up the hotel key card again. Not yet, she amended, but you're planning on it. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were wet but determined. I don't know. Maybe. Warren, I'm not happy. So you decided to fix that by cheating on me with your ex-boyfriend. I decided to fix it by talking to someone who actually listens to me. Did you try talking to your husband first? When? Between your work and your car shows and your poker games with the guys? When exactly should I have scheduled this conversation? She had a point, and we both knew it. I'd been coasting for years, assuming that marriage was like a well-tuned engine, perform regular maintenance, and it would keep running forever. I'd forgotten that relationships needed more than maintenance. They needed attention, but that didn't excuse what she'd done, and it didn't change what happened next. I want you out, I said. Warren, tonight, pack a bag. Go stay with Chloe, or your parents, or the Marriott. I don't care where. You can't kick me out of my own house. Watch me. She stood up, smoothing down her dress, pulling her dignity around her like armor. This is exactly why we don't work anymore. Everything has to be your way or no way at all. My way is not cheating on my spouse. My way is not giving up on 15 years of marriage because of a few conversations with an old friend. A few conversations that required a hotel room. Nothing happened in that hotel room. Yet, she agreed. I finished my bourbon and set the glass in the sink. Pack your bag, Isabelle. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She walked to the doorway, then turned back. For what it's worth, I didn't plan this. Running into Faulkner, I mean. It just happened. Running into him, maybe. Everything after that was a choice. She nodded slowly. You're right. It was a choice, and I'm not sorry I made it. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for another hour, looking at the photographs and thinking about choices. Isabelle's choice to cheat, my choice to ignore the warning signs for months, her choice to lie when confronted, my choice to end it tonight instead of trying to work things out. But the most important choice was still ahead of me, what to do next. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years. David Chen, my college roommate, now a divorce attorney with a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and expensive. The call went straight to voicemail. Dave, it's Warren Barnes. I need a lawyer, and I need one fast. Call me back as soon as you get this. And Dave, I hope you still like a challenge. I hung up and gathered the photographs into a neat stack. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. David Chen called back at 6:30 a.m., which meant he'd gotten my message and understood the urgency. Lawyers who specialize in messy divorces learn to recognize desperation, and they respond accordingly. Warren Barnes, he said when I answered. I haven't heard from you since college. What's the emergency? My wife is cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend. I have photographs. I want her served with papers before she knows what hit her. Slow down. Tell me everything. I gave him the condensed version, the anniversary dinner ambush, the hotel keycard, Ava's surveillance photos, Isabelle's confession that she was reconnecting with Faulkner. David listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. How long have you been married? He asked when I finished. 15 years. Kids? No. Prenup? No. Assets? The house, both our retirement accounts, my business, her car, my truck, maybe $400,000 total. Her income? $65,000 a year. Mine varies, but usually around 50. Any joint accounts? Everything's joint. Checking, savings, credit cards. David was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him typing. Warren, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want to save this marriage? No. Are you sure? Because once we start this process? I'm sure. Good, because if you want to win, we need to move fast. How quickly can you get to my office? I'm already in my truck. Bring the photographs. And Warren, don't use any joint credit cards or access any joint accounts until we talk. Don't give her any ammunition. I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. What about moving money? We'll discuss that when you get here. But hypothetically, if someone were to transfer funds from a joint account to a personal account for legitimate business purposes, that wouldn't be unusual. Hypothetically. David's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that had been renovated to look modern while maintaining its historic character. The kind of place that charged enough to afford good coffee and leather furniture that didn't come from a catalog. He looked exactly the same as he had in college, except for the expensive suit and the confidence that came from 20 years of practice. We'd been roommates junior and senior year, back when he was planning to be a public defender and I was going to work for someone else's garage. Let me see the photographs, he said, after we'd exchanged pleasantries. I spread them across his conference table. He studied each one carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Your sister took these? She's a private investigator. Professional quality, timestamps, clear images, public locations. He nodded approvingly. This is good work. Good enough? For what we need, absolutely. Indiana is a fault state, which means adultery matters in divorce proceedings. These photographs establish a pattern of deceptive behavior. What about the hotel keycard? Even better. Physical evidence of intent, even if nothing happened yet. He looked up from the photos. You said she admitted to the relationship? She called it reconnecting. Did you record the conversation? No. Doesn't matter. The photos tell the story. He leaned back in his chair. Warren, I'm going to be direct with you. Your wife made a mistake. She started this affair before consulting a lawyer, which means she doesn't know how to protect herself. What does that mean for me? It means we can move fast and hit hard before she has time to mount a defense. He pulled a calculator from his desk drawer. Let's talk about assets. For the next hour, David walked me through the mathematics of divorce. Joint accounts would be frozen once papers were served, but until then, either party could access them. Retirement accounts were protected, but regular savings were fair game. Business assets were complicated, but since I'd built the garage myself, most of the value would stay with me. The house is the big question, David said. 15 years of marriage, both names on the deed. She'll want her half. How much is her half worth? Market value minus the mortgage. Probably $60,000. I can live with that. Good, because here's what we're going to do. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. Today, you're going to transfer half of your joint savings to a business account. Completely legal. You need operating capital for the garage. How much are we talking about? What's the current balance? I checked my phone. $23,000. Transfer 12. Leave enough to cover her immediate expenses, but not enough for her to hire a good lawyer. What about credit cards? Cancel them. Today, before she knows what's happening. Is that legal? You're both authorized users. Either of you can cancel at any time. He smiled, and for a moment I saw the college kid who used to help me study for finals. Warren, your wife thinks she's in control of this situation. She thinks she can manage both relationships until she decides what she wants. We're going to show her otherwise. What about Faulkner? What about him? Can we go after him legally? For what? Alienation of affection is hard to prove and harder to collect. Better to focus on the divorce. I thought about Faulkner's smug smile, the way he'd touched Isabelle's shoulder, the casual arrogance of a man who thought he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. There are other ways to handle Faulkner, I said. David's expression sharpened. Warren, I need to advise you. Nothing illegal, nothing violent, just educational. I didn't hear that. Good. We spent another hour drafting the divorce petition. David's secretary would file it that afternoon, and a process server would deliver it to Isabelle at work tomorrow morning. Public, embarrassing, and completely legal. One more thing, David said as I was leaving. Change your passwords, bank accounts, email, social media, everything. Do it today. She doesn't know my passwords. She's lived with you for 15 years. She knows your passwords. He was right, of course. Isabelle knew my birthday, my mother's maiden name, the name of my first car. She knew all the little details that people use to build digital security, back when we trusted each other with everything. I drove straight from David's office to the bank. The transfer took 10 minutes and required 2 forms of identification. $12,000 moved from Warren and Isabelle Barnes, joint account, to Barnes Classic Auto Restoration business checking. Completely legal, completely justified, and completely devastating to someone who'd been planning to use that money to fund a new life with her ex-boyfriend. Next stop, the credit card company. 3 phone calls, 20 minutes on hold, and both our cards were canceled. The customer service representative was apologetic but firm. Mr. Barnes was an authorized user and had every right to close the accounts. What about the outstanding balance? She asked. Send the final statements to my business address. And Mrs. Barnes? She'll figure it out. By noon, I'd changed every password I could remember. Bank accounts, email, Netflix, Amazon, even the garage's social media accounts that Isabelle sometimes used to post photos of restored cars. Each changed password felt like taking back a piece of myself that I'd given away without thinking. My phone rang as I was updating the password on our shared iTunes account. Warren, what did you do? Isabelle's voice was tight with panic. About what? My credit card was declined at lunch. The bank says our account has been restricted. Restricted how? They won't tell me. They said I need to speak with you. I looked at my watch. 12:47 p.m. She'd lasted less than 13 hours before trying to spend money that was no longer there. Where are you having lunch? I asked. What does that matter? Just curious. The bistro on 5th Street. 2 blocks from Faulkner's office. Of course. Warren, what's going on? I moved some money around for business purposes. You'll need to use cash for a few days. What money? How much money? Enough. Enough for what? I hung up. She called back immediately. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail again. By the 3rd call, I turned off my phone entirely. The garage felt like a sanctuary after the morning's emotional warfare. My crew, Tommy, Mike, and Jake, were working on a 1967 Camaro that had been in an accident. The owner wanted it restored to original condition, which meant sourcing parts that hadn't been manufactured in 40 years and rebuilding systems that most mechanics had never seen. Boss, Tommy called when I walked in. How was the anniversary dinner? Educational. Mike looked up from the engine he was rebuilding. That good, huh? Better? I'm getting divorced. The garage went quiet, except for the sound of classic rock playing from the radio in the corner. Tommy set down his wrench and turned to face me. You serious? Filed the papers this morning. Damn. Jake shook his head. Sorry, boss. Don't be. Best decision I've made in months. And I meant it. For the first time since March, I felt like I was moving forward instead of standing still. Isabelle had made her choice, and now I was making mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "How did it go with the lawyer?" I texted back, "Papers get served tomorrow, financial accounts secured." "Good. Want to grab dinner tonight? I have more photos." "More photos?" "From this afternoon, bistro on 5th Street. She's not handling the money situation well." I smiled for the first time all day. "Send them over." The photos arrived 5 minutes later. Isabelle and Faulkner at a corner table, her gesturing frantically while he looked uncomfortable. Another shot of them at the register, Faulkner pulling out his wallet while Isabelle stood behind him with her arms crossed. So Faulkner was paying for lunch now. Interesting. I forwarded the photos to David with a note. Additional evidence of ongoing relationship. His response came back immediately. "Perfect. See you in court." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. I worked on the Camaro's transmission, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of disassembly and diagnosis. There was something comforting about mechanical problems. They had logical solutions and predictable outcomes, unlike marriage. At 6 o'clock, I locked up the garage and drove home. Isabelle's car was in the driveway, which meant she was waiting for me. Good. We had things to discuss. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, still wearing her work clothes, her laptop open in front of her. She looked up when I entered, and I could see she'd been crying. "We need to talk," she said. I figured. "Warren, I know you're angry, but cutting off my access to our money isn't the answer." "Our money?" "Yes, our money. We're married. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours." Interesting philosophy. Does Faulkner feel the same way? Her face flushed. "This isn't about Faulkner." "Everything's about Faulkner now." She closed her laptop and folded her hands on the table. "I made a mistake. I know that. But we can fix this." "How?" "Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes." "What about Faulkner? What about him? Are you going to stop seeing him?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know." "Then we don't have anything to talk about." I walked toward the stairs, but her voice stopped me. "Warren, I need access to our accounts. I have bills to pay, groceries to buy. You can't just cut me off. Watch me. I'll call the bank myself." "Go ahead. They'll tell you the same thing they told you at lunch." Her composure finally cracked completely. "This is ridiculous. You're being vindictive and petty and—" "Careful," I said quietly. "You're talking to the man who's been paying your bills for 15 years while you figured out what you wanted to be when you grew up. I have a job. You have a hobby that pays well. There's a difference." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Maybe I had, metaphorically speaking. "I'm staying at Chloe's tonight," she said finally. "Good choice." "Warren," I turned back. "I never meant for this to happen." "Yes, you did. You just didn't mean for me to find out." After she left, I poured another bourbon and sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the neighbor's fence. Tomorrow, Isabelle would be served with divorce papers at her office, in front of her colleagues and clients. Tomorrow, she'd realize that her husband wasn't the pushover she'd thought he was. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was going to sleep well. The process server found Isabelle at 9:15 a.m., right in the middle of her weekly staff meeting. David had specifically requested someone who looked official, clipboard, badge, the works. Maximum embarrassment for minimum cost. I know because Chloe texted me a play-by-play. "Holy crap, Warren. Server just walked into Izzy's meeting, asked her to sign for documents. She went white as a sheet. Then, 5 minutes later, she locked herself in her office. Her boss wants to know what's going on. And finally, she's crying. Like really crying. What did you do?" I was replacing the clutch in a 1969 Mustang when the text came through. Tommy was helping me wrestle the transmission back into place, both of us covered in grease and sweat. Honest work that produced tangible results, the opposite of whatever Isabelle did in her air-conditioned office. "Everything okay, boss?" Tommy asked, noticing my phone. "Better than okay." My phone rang at 9:47. Isabelle, of course. "Warren, what have you done?" "Good morning to you, too." "Don't play games with me. I just got served with divorce papers, at work, in front of everyone." "Congratulations. You're officially being divorced." "You can't be serious about this." "Serious as a heart attack." "Warren, please. Can we meet somewhere and talk? Just the two of us?" "We had 15 years to talk. You chose to spend the last 3 months talking to Faulkner instead." "That's not fair." "Fair would have been you asking for a divorce before you started cheating. Fair would have been honesty instead of hotel keycards. Fair would have been treating your husband with enough respect to end things cleanly." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable. What do you want from me? Nothing. That's the point. There has to be something, some way to fix this. There is. Sign the papers. And if I don't, then we go to court, and I show the judge those photographs of you and Faulkner. In Indiana, adultery affects asset division. Your choice. I hung up and went back to work. The Mustang's clutch was worn down to nothing, probably hadn't been replaced in 20 years, but with the right parts and enough patience, it would be good as new. Some things could be restored, others needed to be scrapped. Lunch was a turkey sandwich at my desk while I went through the morning's emails. 3 new restoration jobs, 2 parts orders, and 1 message that made me smile. Mr. Barnes, this is Janet Morrison from Channel 8 News. We received a tip about a local business owner whose wife was served divorce papers at work this morning. We'd like to interview you about the challenges of maintaining a marriage while running a small business. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Someone had called the local news? I had a pretty good idea. Who? I forwarded the email to David with a note. Thoughts? His response came back within minutes. Don't talk to reporters. Let me handle media if necessary. Smart advice. The last thing I needed was to turn this into a public spectacle. My phone buzzed with another text from Ava. Lunch at Romano's? I have updates. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in the same booth where my marriage had effectively ended 2 days earlier. Different waiter, same view of the parking lot where I'd made the decision to stop being a victim. Chloe's been talking, Ava said without preamble. Apparently Isabelle spent last night crying and calling Faulkner every hour. And he's not answering. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I wasn't surprised. Faulkner had signed up for an affair, not a divorce. The moment things got complicated, he'd disappear like smoke. There's more, Ava continued. Chloe says Isabelle's been telling people you're having a midlife crisis, that you're being irrational and vindictive. What people? Her parents, for starters, her sister, some of her coworkers. What did you tell Chloe? The truth. That Isabelle's been cheating for months, and you have photographs to prove it. Ava pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a text conversation. Chloe. Warren's lost his mind. Izzy says he's making up stories about her and Faulkner. Ava. Stories don't require hotel keycards. Chloe. What hotel keycards? Ava. Ask your friend about the Marriott on 5th Street. Chloe. Oh. She stopped texting after that, Ava said. Good, let the truth spread naturally. Warren, there's something else you should know. Isabelle called Mom this morning. Our mother lived in Florida now, had moved there after Dad passed 5 years ago. She'd always liked Isabelle, treated her like the daughter she'd never had. What did she say? That you were being unreasonable, that you'd changed the locks and frozen her out of your bank accounts, that she was afraid of what you might do next. And what did Mom say? She asked if Isabelle was cheating on you. Smart woman. Isabelle hung up. We ordered lunch and spent the next hour planning strategy. Ava had contacts throughout the city, other private investigators, court clerks, reporters. Information flowed both ways in her business, and she'd already started spreading the word that Warren Barnes wasn't the villain in this story. What about Faulkner? She asked. What about him? You said there were other ways to handle him. I thought about that. Faulkner had inserted himself into my marriage, seduced my wife, and humiliated me in public, but he'd also made himself vulnerable in the process. Tell me about his business, I said. Import, export, high-end stuff, art, antiques, luxury goods. Legitimate? Mostly. He's had some issues with customs, but nothing criminal. What kind of issues? Mislabeled shipments, undervalued goods, the kind of mistakes that save money on import duties. Interesting. How do you know all this? I dated a customs agent for 6 months last year. Faulkner's name came up in conversation. Is your ex still working customs? She is. Why? Just curious. Ava smiled. Warren, what are you thinking? I'm thinking Faulkner's about to have a very bad week. That afternoon, I called in a favor from an old customer. Jerry Kowalski owned a towing company and owed me for the work I'd done on his vintage Corvette. More importantly, he had contracts with several downtown parking garages. Jerry, I need a favor. Name it. There's a silver Porsche 911 that parks in the Meridian Street garage every day. License plate FHH 2847. I need to know if it's been parked illegally. What kind of illegally? The kind that requires towing. Jerry laughed. I'll check it out. 2 hours later, he called back. Your Porsche friend has been parking in a handicapped space for the past week. No permit visible. That's unfortunate. Very unfortunate, especially since the garage owner is my brother-in-law, and he's been looking for an excuse to crack down on violations. What time does the Porsche usually arrive? Around 8:30 a.m. And what time do you usually patrol that garage? I could start patrolling it around 9 a.m. if you think that would be helpful. I think that would be very helpful. At 5 o'clock, I locked up the garage and drove home. Isabelle's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant she was still staying at Chloe's. Good. I needed space to think and plan. The house felt different without her constant presence. Quieter, but also more peaceful. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the old floorboards creaking as the house settled, the neighbor's dog barking at something in the distance. Sounds that had been masked by 15 years of conversation, television, and the general noise of shared living. I poured a bourbon and sat in my favorite chair. The leather recliner that Isabelle had always complained was too big for the living room. She was probably right. It dominated the space like a monument to masculine stubbornness. But it was comfortable, and it was mine, and I didn't have to justify it to anyone anymore. My phone rang at 7:30. Unknown number. Warren Barnes? Speaking. This is Faulkner Hayes. I think we need to talk. I took a sip of bourbon and smiled. Do we? This situation with Isabelle has gotten out of hand. She's very upset. I imagine she is. Look, I know you're angry, but taking it out on her isn't going to solve anything. I'm not taking anything out on anyone. I'm getting divorced. Because of me. Because of her choices. You were just the catalyst. He was quiet for a moment. What do you want? From you? Nothing. There has to be something, some way to resolve this without destroying everyone involved. Faulkner, let me explain something to you. You inserted yourself into my marriage. You seduced my wife. You humiliated me in public. And now you want to negotiate? I want to minimize the damage. To who? To everyone. The damage is already done. Isabelle made sure of that. Warren, please, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm following the law, working with lawyers, and handling this like a civilized adult. What more do you want? I want you to stop making Isabelle's life miserable. Then you shouldn't have started an affair with a married woman. I hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same number. We're not finished talking, Faulkner said. Yes, we are. I'm trying to be civil here. Civil would have been staying away from my wife. She came to me. And you could have said no. Warren, you don't understand. Isabelle and I have history. We have a connection that goes back 20 years. Had. Past tense. You gave up any claim to that connection when you walked away from her in college. That was different. I was young. I made mistakes. And now you're old and making different mistakes. This isn't a mistake. What Isabelle and I have is real. Real enough to break up her marriage, but not real enough for you to answer your phone when she calls crying? Silence. That's right, Faulkner. I know you've been avoiding her. I know you signed up for an affair, not a divorce. I know you're starting to realize that this situation is more complicated than you thought. You don't know anything. I know you're scared. I know you're in over your head. And I know that tomorrow morning you're going to have bigger problems than my wife's emotional state. What's that supposed to mean? It means you should have thought about consequences before you started this. I hung up again and turned off my phone. Outside, the sun was setting behind the neighbor's oak tree, the same tree I'd watched grow from a sapling when Isabelle and I first moved into this house. 15 years of sunsets, 15 years of seasons, 15 years of believing that marriage was about building something together. Tomorrow, Faulkner would discover that his Porsche had been towed. Tomorrow, Isabelle would realize that her husband wasn't going to be intimidated or negotiated with. Tomorrow, the consequences of their choices would start catching up with them. But tonight, I was going to finish my bourbon and enjoy the silence. Jerry called at 9:23 a.m. with the kind of satisfaction in his voice that only comes from a job well done. Your Porsche friend just got towed. I was under the hood of a 1971 Chevelle, replacing spark plugs that should have been changed 10,000 miles ago. Any drama? Oh, there was drama. He came running out of his building, yelling about mistakes and threatening to sue everybody. My driver just pointed to the handicapped sign and shrugged. Where'd you take it? Impound lot on the south side. He'll need to pay the fine, plus towing fees, plus storage. Should run him about $400. Expensive parking. Very expensive. Especially since the lot's only open until 5 and they don't take credit cards. I smiled. Cash only? Cash only. And they're closed weekends. Which meant Faulkner would be riding the bus until Monday, assuming he could scrape together $400 in cash. A small inconvenience for most people, but a major humiliation for someone who used his luxury car as a status symbol. Jerry, I owe you one. After what you did to my Corvette, we're even. I went back to work on the Chevelle, but my concentration was broken 20 minutes later when Tommy came over with a grin on his face. Boss, you need to see this. He held up his phone, showing me a video posted to social media. The caption read, "Rich guy loses his mind when his illegally parked Porsche gets towed." The video was shaky, obviously shot from a second-story window, but the audio was clear. Faulkner's voice, high and panicked, demanding that the tow truck driver release his car immediately. The driver's calm response that the car was parked illegally. Faulkner's escalating threats about lawsuits and connections and how much the car cost. How many views? I asked. 12,000 and climbing. Comments are brutal. He scrolled down to show me a sampling. Dude parks in handicapped spot and acts like he's the victim. What a tool. That's what happens when you think rules don't apply to you. Love how he keeps talking about how expensive his car is, like that makes it okay to steal parking spots from disabled people. Someone should check if this guy actually has a business license. Seems sketchy. That last comment gave me an idea. Tommy, what do you know about business licenses? You mean like the one we have to display in the office? Exactly like that. Not much. Why? Just curious about the requirements. I spent my lunch break researching business licensing requirements for import-export companies. It was fascinating reading, in a bureaucratic sort of way. Companies dealing in international trade needed multiple licenses: federal import permits, state business licenses, city commercial permits, and all of them required regular renewal. More importantly, they required accurate reporting of business activities. I called Ava. "How's your friend at Customs?" I asked. "Fine. Why?" "I'm curious about Faulkner's import business, specifically whether his business licenses are up to date." "Warren, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal, just a concerned citizen wondering if local businesses are following proper procedures." "You want me to have him investigated?" "I want you to ask your friend if there are any red flags in Faulkner's paperwork. Purely informational." Ava was quiet for a moment. "This is about more than the affair, isn't it?" "This is about consequences. Faulkner thinks he can take whatever he wants without paying a price. I'm going to show him otherwise." "And if there are no red flags? Then he's a legitimate businessman who happened to seduce my wife, but if there are red flags, then he's got bigger problems than a towed Porsche." "Exactly," she called back 2 hours later. "Your instincts were right," she said without preamble. "Faulkner's been playing fast and loose with import regulations, undervalued shipments, mislabeled contents, some questionable country of origin documentation." "How questionable?" "The kind that gets you audited, the kind that results in fines and penalties and very uncomfortable conversations with federal investigators." "Has anyone reported these violations?" "Not yet. But my friend says it wouldn't take much to trigger an investigation, a complaint from a competitor, a tip from a concerned citizen, that sort of thing." "What would happen if someone filed a complaint?" "Full audit of his business records going back 3 years, examination of all his import documentation, interviews with his suppliers and customers, the kind of scrutiny that most businesses can't survive, especially if they've been cutting corners." "How long would that take?" "Months, maybe longer. And even if he's eventually cleared, the damage to his reputation would be permanent." I thought about that. Faulkner had built his business on relationships and trust. His clients were wealthy collectors who valued discretion and reliability. A federal investigation would destroy both. "Ava, hypothetically, how would someone file such a complaint?" "Hypothetically, they would contact the customs fraud hotline and provide specific information about suspicious activities." "What kind of specific information?" "Dates, shipment numbers, discrepancies in documentation, the kind of information that would be available to someone who had access to Faulkner's business records." "And where would someone get access to those records?" "Well, if someone were dating him, they might see paperwork lying around his office. Or if someone were doing business with him, they might notice inconsistencies in invoices and shipping documents." Isabelle's been to his office. "Many times, according to my surveillance photos." "And she's detail-oriented. She'd notice discrepancies." "She would. The question is whether she'd be willing to share that information." I thought about Isabelle, sitting in Faulkner's office while he conducted business, probably bored and looking around, noticing things. She had a good eye for numbers and a natural suspicion of anything that seemed too good to be true. "She might not have a choice," I said. "What do you mean?" "Divorce proceedings include discovery. Both parties have to disclose all assets and income sources. If Isabel's been receiving gifts from Faulkner, or if he's been paying for hotel rooms and dinners, that becomes part of the financial record. And if his business practices come to light during discovery, then it becomes a matter of public record. Ava laughed. Warren, you're more devious than I gave you credit for. I prefer to think of it as thorough. That evening, I drove past Faulkner's office building. His parking space was empty, of course, since his Porsche was sitting in an impound lot across town. I wondered how he'd gotten home, whether he'd called a taxi or asked a friend for a ride. Either way, it was a humbling experience for someone accustomed to luxury. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. Isabelle. Warren, we need to talk. About what? About ending this madness. About finding a way to resolve things without destroying everyone involved. Interesting choice of words. Faulkner used almost the same phrase last night. You talked to Faulkner? He called me, wanted to negotiate. What did you tell him? That he should have thought about consequences before he started an affair with a married woman? She was quiet for a moment. Warren, I know you're hurt, but this vindictive behavior isn't like you. How would you know what's like me? You've been too busy with your ex-boyfriend to pay attention to your husband. That's not fair. Neither is adultery. I made a mistake, I admit that, but we can fix this. We? You and me, our marriage. What about Faulkner? Another pause. What about him? Are you going to stop seeing him? It's complicated. No, it's not. It's a yes or no question. Warren, you don't understand. Faulkner and I have history. We have feelings for each other that go back 20 years. And I'm your husband of 15 years. Which relationship matters more? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I hung up and went inside. The house was quiet again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. I poured a bourbon and sat in my recliner, thinking about choices and consequences. Isabelle had chosen Faulkner over me. Faulkner had chosen to pursue a married woman. Now they were both learning that choices have prices, and some prices are higher than expected. Tomorrow I would call David and discuss the discovery process. Tomorrow I would ask about subpoenaing financial records and business documents. Tomorrow I would start the process of turning Faulkner's affair into his downfall. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the silence and plan my next move. The war was just getting started. 3 weeks later, everything came together at once. Faulkner's business was under federal investigation, triggered by an anonymous tip about import irregularities. The customs audit had uncovered exactly what Ava's friend had predicted: systematic undervaluation of goods, fraudulent country of origin certificates, and tax evasion totaling nearly $200,000 over 3 years. The story broke on a Thursday morning, front page of the business section. Local importer under federal investigation for customs fraud. The article included quotes from federal prosecutors, details about seized records, and a photograph of Faulkner looking haggard as he left the courthouse after his initial hearing. I was reading the article over coffee when David called. Have you seen the news? He asked. Just finished reading it. This changes everything. Isabelle's association with Faulkner is now a legal liability. Any gifts he gave her, any expenses he paid, any business advice he provided, all of it could be considered proceeds from criminal activity. What does that mean for the divorce? It means she's going to want to settle quickly and quietly. The last thing she needs is her name associated with a federal fraud case. He was right. By noon, Isabelle's lawyer had called requesting an emergency meeting. By 2 o'clock, we were sitting in David's conference room with a settlement offer that gave me everything I'd asked for and more. My client is prepared to accept a 60-40 split of assets in Mr. Barnes's favor, Isabelle's lawyer said. She waives any claim to spousal support and agrees to a no-contest divorce. In exchange for what? David asked. Discretion. No public statements about the reasons for the divorce, no cooperation with federal investigators. Complete separation of the parties effective immediately. I looked at the settlement terms. The house, my business, most of our savings, and my freedom. Everything I wanted, handed to me on a silver platter because Isabelle was desperate to distance herself from Faulkner's legal troubles. Where do I sign? I asked. The papers were filed that afternoon. By 5 o'clock, I was officially divorced and significantly wealthier than I'd been that morning. Isabelle had moved out of Chloe's apartment and into a small rental across town, as far from Faulkner's neighborhood as she could manage while still maintaining her job. I celebrated by taking my crew out for drinks at Murphy's Pub, the kind of working-class bar that served cold beer and minded its own business. Tommy raised his glass in a toast. To the boss, who proved that nice guys don't always finish last. I was never that nice, I said. Nice enough, Mike added. You could have destroyed her completely. I destroyed her enough. And I had. Isabelle's reputation was ruined, her social circle had abandoned her, and her career was permanently stained by association with Faulkner's crimes. She'd lost her marriage, her financial security, and her standing in the community. It was more than enough revenge for any reasonable person. But I wasn't feeling particularly reasonable. The next morning, I drove to Faulkner's office building. His business was closed, of course, shut down pending the outcome of the federal investigation, but I knew he still came by occasionally to meet with lawyers and accountants, trying to salvage what he could from the wreckage of his empire. I was right. His replacement car, a modest sedan that must have hurt his ego every time he looked at it, was parked in the visitors section. I waited in my truck, listening to classic rock and thinking about justice. He emerged at 11:30, carrying a cardboard box that probably contained the last of his personal belongings. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, worn down by legal pressure and public humiliation. The silver-haired confidence was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who'd lost everything. I rolled down my window as he approached his car. Faulkner. He looked up, startled. For a moment, I thought he might run. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and walked over to my truck. Warren, I suppose you're here to gloat. Actually, I'm here to thank you. Thank me? For showing me who my wife really was, for forcing me to stop settling for a marriage that was already over, for giving me the motivation to build a better life. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. You destroyed my business, he said finally. No, you destroyed your business when you decided to commit customs fraud. I just helped the authorities notice. You cost me everything. You cost yourself everything when you decided to seduce a married woman. I just made sure there were consequences. He set down his cardboard box and leaned against my truck. What do you want, Warren? Nothing. I already got everything I wanted. Then why are you here? To give you some advice. I don't need your advice. Sure you do. You're about to lose everything. Your business, your reputation, probably your freedom. You'll need to start over somewhere else, probably under a different name. When you do, remember this conversation. Remember what about it? That actions have consequences. That other people's lives matter. That you can't just take whatever you want without paying a price. I started my engine and put the truck in gear. Warren, he called as I was pulling away. I stopped and rolled down my window again. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About Isabelle, about everything. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You just didn't think you'd get caught. I drove away and left him standing in the parking lot with his cardboard box and his regrets. That evening, I had dinner with Ava at Romano's. Same restaurant where this had all started, but everything was different now. The waiter who served us was friendly and professional, the food was excellent, and the company was honest. So what's next? Ava asked over dessert. Next? Now that you've won, now that you've gotten your revenge, what do you do with the rest of your life? I thought about that. For the past month, I'd been focused entirely on the divorce, on making Isabelle and Faulkner pay for what they'd done. But now that it was over, I had to figure out what came after victory. I'm thinking about expanding the business, I said finally. Maybe hiring another mechanic, taking on more restoration projects. That's it? That's your grand plan for the future? It's a start. What about dating? What about finding someone new? Eventually, when I'm ready. When will you be ready? When I meet someone who's worth the risk. Ava smiled. You know, there's this woman who works at the parts supply company. Divorced, 2 kids, owns her own house. She's been asking about you. Has she now? Her name's Linda. She's smart, funny, and she knows the difference between a carburetor and a transmission. Impressive qualifications. More impressive than good looks and a business degree, apparently. She had a point. Isabelle had been beautiful and successful, but she'd also been dishonest and selfish. Maybe it was time to value different qualities in a partner. Set it up, I said. Really? Really, but somewhere public, and somewhere that serves good food. I've learned not to trust romantic restaurants. Ava laughed. How about Murphy's Pub? Nothing romantic about beer and burgers. Perfect. We finished dinner and walked out to the parking lot where this whole story had begun. The neon sign cast the same red glow. The pavement was still cracked in the same places, but I felt like a completely different person than the man who'd walked out of this restaurant a month ago. That man had been betrayed, humiliated, and broken. This man was free, financially secure, and ready to start over. Warren, Ava said as we reached our cars. Yeah? I'm proud of you. For how you handled all this. For not letting them destroy you. They couldn't destroy me. They could only show me what I was really made of. And what's that? something stronger than I thought. I drove home through streets that looked familiar, but felt different. The house was mine now, completely and legally mine. The business was thriving. The future was unwritten. For the first time in 15 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. 3 months later, I married Linda in a small ceremony at Murphy's Pub, surrounded by friends who'd supported me through the divorce and employees who'd become family. Isabelle wasn't invited, of course. Neither was Faulkner, who was serving 18 months in federal prison for customs fraud. But that's another story. This story ends here, in the parking lot of Romano's. With a taste of good food and honest conversation still on my tongue, and the promise of a better future stretching out ahead of me like an open road. Some endings are beginnings in disguise.